Welcome to another episode of Harbor Rock Wealth Management's podcast series, Life, Health, and Wealth, where we discuss financially driven topics and how they relate to our financial lifestyles. He's Reuben Smith. I'm Jimmy Luster, and we have our first guest of 2024. So happy New Year to you all. Thanks for coming back to watch. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have back than our resident deep thinker and our new CEO, by the way.
CEO.
Did you know that?
Oh.
Our Chief Enlightenment Officer.
Ooh. Wow.
You know, I got to come up with something new for you every time. I feel like it's well deserved. So,
I
folks,
appreciate that.
this is our Chief Enlightenment Officer here, our enlightened thinker. So
Well,
thanks
I
for being
appreciate
back.
that you went that angle, Jimmy, because usually CEO sometimes is attributed to people that are church and Easter onlys.
Oh.
That, you know,
I
we
haven't
hear
heard- I
about
haven't
like
heard
in
that
the,
one.
in the church community. You know, there's your CEOs in certain
right.
church communities. So when you said that, it's kind of like,
You're like, where is he
Bear
going
with
with
me.
this?
Bear with
yeah,
me.
I
So,
appreciate that. Thank you.
hopefully you like that. So welcome back. We appreciate you taking some time. And for those of you out there that are watching, Jake is going to be on probably quarterly, especially for the topic that we're revisiting that we hit on earlier or late last year, the 7 dimensions of wellness. And that's it. I can't believe we got in as much as we did last time in the amount of time. And I felt like we were kind of flooring it a little bit and bouncing around, and we hit a lot of information there. And this, like you were saying earlier, this isn't a light topic. So now we're going to hit a couple of these dimensions at a time and really unpack some of this and get vulnerable and talk about our own personal lives. And I think that's something that you all might be interested in out there. So we're
Yeah, I
excited.
think it's each of these topics they warrant their own show. To be honest, it's
Yeah.
But I think we're going to break it down. After our discussion, we found a way to break it down and maybe to 3 different episodes. So
Yeah.
looking forward to this one.
But before we do,
Here we go.
I promise stats every time or some weird facts and factoids and figures. So I have 3. The shortest commercial flight in the planet is in Scotland between 2 islands, and it's 56 seconds long.
What?
And it is a registered Logan Air, does 56-second commercial flights. It's 1.7 miles. And that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a different.
Like, is it even, can you get a boat and maybe paddle across? I don't know, man. Like, is it the most cost-effective thing? So 56 second
seconds.
commercial flight from tip to tip. The next one. So these are going to get a little bit more relevant to what we're actually talking about. Each one.
Okay.
The brain. It's an amazing organ in our body. The brain is the fattest organ in the human body, the fattiest.
Okay.
And it's 60% fat. A lot of people, you go, what's the fattest organ? Your belly, your behind. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's your brain.
Well, it's
So,
hopefully it's a good fats.
yes, it is.
That's the omegas.
That's
you
right.
know, and all
That's
of
right.
that,
I
and-
thought that was interesting, though.
Yeah.
And then the world record for the longest meditation period.
Oof.
I thought this was kind of cool. So I did some research on this, and there is no specific one. One said one lady in India did it for 12 years, but no one can verify any of this. So the best one I found, and a lot of people agreed, was a 38-hour meditation period uninterrupted. And that was in 2015 by an Indian man. So
Yeah, that's impressive. There, I think we'll talk. Some of my personal experiences will come out maybe a little bit more in this episode. And meditation has been a big part of my journey, my development. But there was a period when I was significantly ill with an autoimmune disease, and I had to go to some places. And I remember working my way up to 10 minutes was a struggle at a time, and I was getting up to close to an hour.
Wow.
The disconnect when you're in a place where you can block the monkey mind, and that's came up in previous conversation with us.
Yeah.
But when you can block mind chatter and focus on breath, and disappear for an hour, you're in a different place in life.
Wow.
And so I can
38 hours.
That's incredible.
I know. And so Jill and I want to get back to this. And when we first got an apartment together, we had a lot of fun. And with a lot of fun comes some tough mornings, So we were in that stage of like just dating, and we were out, going out all the time, staying up really late and just having a ball. And, it was one of those New Year's things that we were like, what do you think about like trying to practice mindfulness and like meditate? We should meditate together. So we did. We started doing that, and we'd love to get back to it. We'd lay out a yoga mat in the living room, light or no light. You know, we'd usually dim it, light some incense, or put on some music, or and we'd sit back to back, and we were feeling each other's breath. And
Interesting.
but you know what? We started. Let's start with 5 minutes. That's easy. It was not easy. No. You want to say something. You know, you're like, are you feeling it? No, we're not supposed to talk. So that's a crazy discipline. I mean, 10 minutes turns into, it seems like a lifetime, you know, so it's pretty impressive.
Awesome. That's
pretty
awesome.
impressive.
That's something that I've yet to really dive into. Certainly I find interesting, but I think at where I'm at in life, I would need to have almost a separate building away from my house to do it anywhere close to home. I'd have to like rent a meditation room. Yeah, that's a good idea for a business.
Yeah. Right.
Meditation rooms.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about meditation and kind of some different practices that exist.
Sure.
When we kind of dive into the spiritual realm here. I don't want to get in before we're ready and complete.
No, I think we're getting ready.
I think we're, you know, especially for the sake of time today, we do not want to rush these topics, and we want to pause and take as much time as we need to really address these. So I know we're going to talk about the seen and unseen. Now, you're much more familiar with this than me. We've talked briefly on it, and I think today we're diving into some unseen dimensions, if I'm correct.
Yeah, to revisit the 7 dimensions for those that either are new to the podcast or just need that review going forward. Last time I was on, was a part of a book, and my good friend Josh Darnell created this framework for his life as a young man, and we've been buddies forever, and it's something we always talked about with these 7 dimensions. So the book exists. The idea of the 7 dimensions is gaining a little bit of traction right now within some circles that we're involved in. Which is exciting because it obviously adds an element of validity. But I think that people are starting to really find value and be able to understand these different components to their lives. And then there's the world of the unseen is being, I feel like that's something that people are drawn to a little bit more because they find tremendous value in that. So the 7 dimensions being spiritual, which is kind of like the core component in my eyes to who we are, you know, as human beings in this experience.
Yeah.
Our emotional selves, our mental selves, our relational, our physical, our either actionable or professional, and then the financial component, which I think is important in Western civilization because we are not all growing our own food and building our own homes.
Totally.
So having, I think, a certain understanding of what money is, what economy is in our own lives is, you know, also some value to that.
Yeah.
When we talked the other day to kind of wrap our head around what the show would look like, you brought to the table this idea of splitting it between the unseen and the seen, and to me that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like in at least my experience growing up was focusing on the seen more, and that I didn't necessarily grow up in a religious household or anything like that. But as a boy growing up, it wasn't okay to be emotional. Spiritual seemed scary, and being, you know, mental, well, am I unstable? So those were things that I actually avoided, and focusing on more the seen items, which are, like you said, the professional or actionable or financial. What's my end goal? Do I want to have a certain job, live in the right zip code? Kind of more of these tangible features. So I'm excited for this episode because I think it's going to touch a spot for us all, and hopefully the viewers, that leads to a little bit more vulnerability.
Yeah, and it's also speaking, well, so those 4 metrics, you know, the relational, physical, financial, professional, that's the world of effect, right? So the internal world or the unseen, that's where the work is done, hopefully at the conscious, but definitely at the subconscious level, things occur, and that is then the immeasurable world. And so we've been taught, it's low-hanging fruit, you know, so it's natural for us to look at, you know, what our eyes pick up, what society values, you know, there's things, those sell better. So yeah, we'll focus on the unseen. You also said something that just sparked something within me, and I think that we need to understand that our generation, our parents' generation, we were the generation of kids whose parents participated in wars for a while. There was decades of war, strife, calamity,
Sure.
and not just from citizens of the United States, slavery. There was a lot of things that were traumas that took place. And so in order to be a valued male in society, there was no place for emotion, right?
Right.
You needed to be able to confront death or participate directly in death on a daily or minute by minute basis.
Right.
Who you were in your mental, you needed to be sharp and actionable right away. As far as the spiritual side, I think religion played a role, but religion was more of this that's different for everybody. So I can't
Sure.
really make a comment relating to that. But I think that we were like kind of the tail end of that, right? The Vietnam era.
Well, especially
Civil
growing
rights.
up, like where we grew, our age, where we were, if you were baking a cake called masculinity, those were not the ingredients.
No.
You look on the back of the box, and those weren't there.
Right.
And that doesn't mean my dad didn't have compassion for me in that sense, but it was more aggressive behavior. It was quick action, like you were saying, making decisions, standing tall, being an anchor. And there wasn't a lot of, it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to show your emotion this way. It seems like much more nowadays. It is definitely more. There's more exposure around it. I think mental health in general is way more in the limelight now.
Sure.
The importance of that to have sustainable success as an individual, being who you are. It wasn't as much as it was back then. I mean, so this is great. I love talking about this now. I love learning more about the structure behind it, and there's a why. It's not as mysterious.
I got an idea. I've never told one of my daughters to rub some dirt on it.
Oh,
Put it that way.
totally.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, take
You
some
know what I
tussin,
mean?
get out the tussin, rub a salt tablet on it. Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so we give ourselves permission. We have three guys talking about spirituality, emotional well-being, and mental well-being. So hopefully we can represent the feminine as best as possible.
Absolutely.
And that's a missing component. But I'm conscious of that. For sure. And to give ourselves permission to get into these topics, with feeling vulnerable, being vulnerable, but not hitting to what kind of like a Disney level of demasculinizing,
Sure.
Males or anything like that. So that's, as society, we're still finding that equilibrium
Well put.
of what that looks like,
Yeah.
to us all. So hopefully, as a viewer, you don't think, oh, these guys, we got snowflakes talking, or some of these terms we kind of add to.
Oh, the alpha betas and yeah, right.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's my personal opinion that there's, and we talked about this a little bit just earlier, was that I feel like I'm part of a larger flow, like a movement, and these movements don't happen. I don't want to say movement's probably not the right word, but there's a shift, and what it means to be a man, and what it means to be a father, and what it means to even go to work every day. I think things are shifting as far as what is success. It's no longer. Oh, I don't want to say what I think it, but I feel like there's these underlying shifts, and when we start talking, 20 years ago, three guys in a room talking about spirituality and emotions and mental behaviors, you would not have found me in this room. That's just be honest. But I feel like there's, through my work over the last few years, and I feel like I'm part of a greater shift.
For sure. It's the evolution of mass consciousness. One of the books I'll be talking about here, Power versus Force, talks about that shift in consciousness, and we're at a place now. So they have these at calibration level, 0 through 1,000, and at the level 200, anything 200 or more kind of supports life. Anything below 200, you start diminishing the experience of the living organism or life itself. So that's kind of the metric, 0 through 1,000. And so as a consciousness, the way that they calibrate these numbers utilizing applied kinesiology, we crossed the 200 level as a society probably about 15 or 20 years ago. So that's kind of exciting. And it coincides also with, at 2012, there was this big end of the world or end of times, and there were different interpretations of what that meant. And I was fortunate enough I dove into that. I was very interested in what that meant. And I was in Guatemala and learned a little bit about the Mayan calendar and the Baktun cycle in 2010, 2011, right prior to it. Had some phenomenal conversations with people that appearance-wise did not look like intellectuals, but these phenomenal in what they knew and what we were talking about from two different sources, right? So I'm reading books by John Major Jenkins at that time and some quantum physics things, and then he's spouting in his best English possible, some other concepts and ideas from other people that he's, was involved with, different sources, same conversation pieces. So it was really fascinating. Point of the story being, the Bible, there's kind of like this shift from the, like the fish, Pisces, and astronomy and whatnot. So we're at a phase, let's just say, where we're evolving or changing, in consciousness, and which is perfect to talk about spirituality and what that means.
I love it.
That component of our lives.
So let's dive in. Let's dive into. We got spiritual, emotional, and mental.
No, I'm ready. I was just going to say no. We're at a perfect spot to really unpack this. Let's do it.
I think it's important for me to start off with a personal story to help understand where I'm coming from as a guest speaker, and this journey, because when we talk about metrics of success, for me, the spiritual journey has been important since I was in 8th grade. And it started on a morning, February, March, and my dad said, hey, let's go snowboarding late at night. Let's skip school and go snowboarding. My brother said no, he had a test. It's like, yeah, I'm down to skip school and go snowboarding for sure, Big Bear. And brought a buddy of mine, Chad Swain. I don't know if you remember Chad Swain. And, Chad said yes. And so we're driving up to go snowboarding. And when you pass out of Running Springs, you go through Running Springs, you have to slow down. Once you get through Running Springs, the excitement builds because you're almost, to Big close. Bear, and you're getting past Snow Valley and whatnot. So we go through Running Springs, and I remember listening to Mark and Brian. I'm kind of like slumped in my chair, and my dad's driving, and Chad's behind me. And right as we pass out of Running Springs, my dad hits the accelerator. Well, upon doing that, all of a sudden, like the back end slides out, and then back slides out the other way. And then it's at that point we realize that we're on a massive sheet of ice, black ice.
Yep.
Car slides again sideways, and at that point I heard my dad say an expletive, and I remember listening like Mark and Brian's laughter or something like that. It was like the last thing I can consciously remember, and then I knew this is going to get real, right?
Yeah.
And it's happening really quick. Well, as we hit sideways, we finally hit the pavement, and traveling sideways, tires and whatnot. We were in a Ford Bronco 2, not the OJ Bronco, a smaller version.
I remember them,
exactly.
Yeah, and they were high-profile vehicles. We completed our first flip sideways. And so I remember hitting the pavement and the metal around the vehicle. So the window popped and exploded inward. And I remember the metal of the vehicle kind of coming over my shoulder a little bit. Wow. Then we flipped again, and then maybe one other time. And it was during that period where I remember, okay, this is it. And everything kind of became white. And it's different when we hear about near-death experiences from people that I think truly kind of pass and hit that veil. Maybe the heart stops or, brain functioning stops. I don't think I was there. My body was preparing for a traumatic experience, and consciousness just shuts down. Nonetheless, it was not like a darkness. There was kind of like I would say white, but there was just this vibrant state of being. It was kind of interesting. So we flipped a few times and then went down a hill. And then upon going down the hill, we were upside down, and we had hit a tree. And I wasn't aware of any of this at the time. I was shut down in consciousness. And all of a sudden, when we stopped, I was upside down, and my dad was like on top of me here. And the force of the accident, he had bent the steering wheels completely like in this way.
Wow.
And the snowboards shot through the front of the windshield. And I'm thinking, oh, dude, Chad's a goner, right?
Yeah.
And for myself, I had a little bit of glass sticking out of my elbow, and I was up against the tree completely. And so then I looked back, and my buddy's eyes are as big as, Jolly Ranchers. And, my dad said, "Holy, we're
Yeah,
alive.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
alive." And it's like, oh my God, we survived that experience. Okay, now where are we? Well, we were up against a tree. There was one tree within like this 50-yard span of this cliff. And then below us was a ravine with rocks and like a flowing creek.
Unreal. Yeah.
So it's probably another 40 to 80
wow.
feet down, something like that. It was hard to
Wouldn't
remember.
have been good. Yeah.
No, but you could hear cars skidding up top, right? So they're starting to hit the people behind us hitting the ice. And then you hear people that had stopped coming out screaming. There's a lady yelling. And we climbed out of the vehicle and scampered up to the top. It was pretty steep. Long story short, we got there. Highway patrol later came. Some people helped us out. And I remember the highway patrol when he arrived, talking to a service vehicle that had shown up and said, how many fatalities are down there?
Yeah.
And the guy's like, dude, none. It's these three guys standing right here,
Wow.
And the highway patrol walks over to us and he says, "Yeah, I don't know if you guys are religious or what you believe in, but I think today should mark the start of your spiritual journey, whatever it is."
Huh.
I've never seen anybody survive anything like that.
Wow.
So it's pretty incredible that you guys are alive, and survived. that
You were
crash.
able to crawl out of it. Wow.
Yeah. So at 14 years old, for me, that struck having that traumatic experience, and not everybody, gets a traumatic experience to propel them, into a spiritual journey. But I remember thinking, and what he said, he looked at me and my buddy and he said, just make sure that make your lives count from this day forward. So I appreciate the presence of the mind of the
Sure.
CHP for sure. But from that day forward, I was very intentional in understanding meaning and purpose for my life, and then learning more about what spirituality was. And it came to me in different forms. It was religion, that at that time,
That's usually what the first people think of. You say
For sure.
spiritual, and there's almost a negative connotation, like, "Oh, religion. I'm not religious." No, that's not what I said.
right.
So I just don't think people know a lot about like the differences.
Yeah, and there's three core questions that I guess I would have to ask somebody. It's, so to you, are you a spiritual being having a human experience? Are you a human being seeking a spiritual experience? Or is your kind of core philosophy that there's just this randomization, you're just here, and when this life form is done, it's just over?
Yeah.
For me, I think those are the main three core philosophies you look
I
at.
like how you put that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the spiritual piece is then, and you can get into like the deeper meanings of, the word spirit, which comes from like inspire or to take in breath. It has to do, there's some Greek meaning and you can jump down some rabbit holes with that. But that's kind of the core of who we are in this life experience in this body, So for the rest of this conversation, I think and I'm open-minded to wherever you are as an individual. For me, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. And so that has allowed me to then kind of take the perspective of, and I've granted myself permission to being open-minded to different ways of thought, different philosophies. Going to a Christian university and being a part of a traditional Christian background served its purpose wonderfully. And I still have a tremendous deep love for, what I've learned through the Bible, through people in my life. But where I am now and where I've been the last several years, traveling and learning more, I just feel like I needed other language and I needed to hear things messaged differently to fulfill my growth, and my personal evolution.
Well, and
Go ahead.
thanks for sharing that story. I went through, I'm not going to share my story at this moment, but I went through a similar thing in a car accident in high school, and it was bad. I had like a hole in my head, and I went through a similar experience with that, almost like out of body, that I could see myself being worked on and all that. And we can talk. We're going to talk about this a lot. And I'm glad you're good. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
The thing I thought about right away when you were talking about, oh, it's those guys right there. I wonder who else was affected that day. I wonder who spiritually changed. Was it maybe that officer? Was it the lady that was screaming? who else, that transfer of energy we talk about when you're in your own spiritual journey and you're working on yourself, I think like unconsciously that energy it has to be transferred out, has to go somewhere, and like other people are affected. And then what are they doing with that? How many times has that guy told that story? And maybe someone else is like, oh, dude, I had a similar experience. And it's kind of like hooking up with that guy I talked about earlier in that story. That's the most unlikely rendezvous, and that was a spiritual moment, So I just think that's really neat. It goes beyond your own right here,
It does, and it's a personal experience. So for me, when we talk about spirituality and power versus force, the reason I have this book next to me here, and I just finished a book study with Brian De La Puente, whom we had on, and another friend of ours, Ryan Gilbert. And so we have yet to have conversations around this book yet. But this is my second go with it, and I read it probably about 10, 12, 15 years ago, in completely different eyes, so I related to material differently. But so spiritual presence for me, so having that experience, it's mine, it's part of my journey, but there isn't anybody that can bring any sort of like intellect or, like try to reason. Like I know that exists. It's irrefutable for me and my experience, so that's how I know it's a very authentic piece and component of my life, and is the foundation, because when I look at how I think, how I feel emotion, how I operate in life, I go to that place of inner being, that quiet, and I try to connect to what I would call, God, or the universe, or that infinite presence, right? There's different names that we give to source. So I think for the sake of moving forward, I'm going to call it source.
Sure.
Because I think that
higher
there's
power, something like that,
Sure.
right? Like an energy, something.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you were going to say
Yes, I
something a minute ago too.
No. I there's a lot going through my mind right now. But what I want to say based off what you guys just talked about is that I think it's really important to note that there's, unlike, let's say, specific religions, or versions of Christianity or whatever the religion is, where there tends to be a certain way to do things, or a right or a wrong, perhaps. I feel like spirituality is an individual journey, and it's you determine the path, and that's where 5-10 years ago I would have associated spirituality with religion. I am a spiritual being, however, I am not religious. I have not had that influence in my life, and it's not good or bad. It's just, it is what it is.
Yep.
So as far as your three questions, I would say I'm not at your level where I can wholeheartedly identify as a spiritual being having a human experience. I am a human seeking more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that.
I think that's fair, and I would say that's probably more of a common place of the people that I associate with and communicate with. And that's just where you are, in your journey. One of the things I love about City Slickers is when Curly says the one thing and you never get the answer.
That's
yeah.
right.
But Billy
That's right.
Crystal, figures out what his one thing
Yeah,
is.
the secret of life. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
it.
and
That's it.
so
Good reference.
that's part of the journey, and what that does too. It's important to recognize it as a journey because it's continual unfoldment, and it empowers us and becomes our own. When it's something that's forced upon us, power versus force. When it's something that's forced upon us, it doesn't stick. There's no sustainability. It's one of the reasons why, and we both went to a Christian university, the same Christian university, James. Kids sometimes are at a different place when they graduate than when they came in, and it's because they came in and their parents kind of had this structure around them and said, here's what we believe in.
Oh, there
and
was
here's
all
what we do
walks
as a
there
family.
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, by the end, it started looking differently.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. For me, I went into, my, finding myself was more middle school. High school, a little bit lost, but had a lot of development with Coach Mack and Bible studies. And then for me, college was, and that's why Azusa was perfect, was fine tuning leadership skills, diving more into, spirituality. And I had some great people that helped foster that within me.
Yeah.
And that's, so when we look at spiritual well-being, it's diving into that unseen component of ourselves and tapping into source, and so we think in terms sometimes of three-dimensional, and we think of this vast universe and whatnot, but where source is, it's like you can't define it. It really isn't size. There's the scope of it's unfathomable in this human sense. So what do we do to tap into that source? And that's, for me, and I think for a lot of people, they've recognized how valuable of a tool meditation is. Mm-hmm. Spending time learning how to breathe, right? So your breath is where you connect to that source.
Yep.
I think that's where the word spirit and, inspire and all that is so important, and understanding what breath is. It's a continual connect to life. And it's also kind of binary, right? You let life out, and then you bring some back in, and then, it's the system with the trees,
Sure.
which are kind of given back to us. So there's a lot to it when you think about it, just breathing. And so meditation is that connection to breath, that connection to source, while quieting down the mind.
I love it.
And it's a practice. Everybody will say it's a practice. It is.
So let's talk about, because I've had spiritual experiences, and I would define that as a place where everything is slower. I'm present.
Can you say grounded?
100%.
I love present too.
Ultimate humility.
Yeah.
I have zero expectation of what happens tomorrow or the next day or the next minute. And it's I would guess that's, I don't meditate a lot, but that's essentially where you're coming from. So without that component, or the ability to find a quieter place, or not just physically a quieter place, but get to where things are slower and you're more present and grounded, it's going to be hard to identify spiritual experiences, or to be able to connect to yourself, which I think leads to the next couple ones, which are, to really identify like where you're at, what you want from an emotional or mental level. So,
Yeah.
but the practicing was interesting too, because we've talked about that, similar to like going to the gym,
Well,
right?
it's like a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you don't master. It's funny. So the gentleman I was speaking to yesterday, I had the most unlikely, spiritual rendezvous with someone yesterday. Was this guy at my dentist office. And, that was it. Yeah, yesterday. And, it was such a weird situation, but, he said the same thing. He's all, yeah, exactly. It's like it's a dental practice. It's a medical practice. You don't master it. It was just such a good moment, and wasn't expecting that at all. You never know when you're going to be in that situation to connect with someone like that. And it goes back to what you were saying, when you're kind of present and grounded. Someone might say that's a moment of boredom almost, and shouldn't have a negative connotation. That puts you in some of the most creative places at the same time. Think about when you're trying to remember something, like you have writer's block or something, and you're so engaged that your mind is monkey-minded. It's so cluttered up, and then you're washing dishes later after dinner, and you're like, oh yeah. You're like, oh yeah, I want to write that down. It's a great idea. Why does that happen? Because you're free of all those other things, and you're not really thinking about it.
Yeah, you allow the mind to get into a state of flow.
Yeah.
Things start blocking out, and it's almost like it's our innate way of coming to a place of being grounded. And we can start to block out certain things. For some people, they find, washing dishes or doing certain work can be meditative, because you're focused on something singular. Mm-hmm. It's just you, your breath, and what you're doing there.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a component. For some people, it's their religious text, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, or, words from Buddha, whatever it is, getting into those texts, spending time with higher level thoughts, excuse me, and then taking those thoughts and trying to internalize them. So the idea of spiritual wellness and being grounded spiritually or at your core values is that you can tap into that unseen internal place for yourself that's kind of that infinite and become centered, become grounded. And then the way that we know and experience that, the communication, is then through emotions. So our emotions, it's kind of like the vehicle. We find a way to connect to source, to foundation, and then we have some sort of emotional feeling or, reaction to what we're experiencing.
So let's are we ready to move to that? How does our spiritual experience affect us on our emotional piece? How do those correlate?
Yeah, so the correlation, I like to look at emotion as energy in motion. So whether it's an inspiration, might bring a state of joy. And joy, I think, is the main place that we'd like to get to. It's sustainable. It lasts longer, and I think it's like a consistent way of behaving, an existent kind of being, a state of being. I think joy is that ultimate experience. The spiritual practice, I think, gives us those insights. If we look at also, so when we look at the universe or we look at human consciousness, think of it like a computer. There's this mainframe that we all have the ability to tap into. Instantly, it exists, and that's human consciousness. So through spiritual practice, we tap into that mainframe. Our emotional piece, then, that's the piece then that begins to govern our internal experience, which then shows up in external experience, right? Cause and effects.
Is that where you would say we deem things good or bad, right or wrong?
Yeah, so there's a world of relative, and I'm going to pull up Power versus Force here to talk a little bit about motions, because I'm not one that really gets into where it's not relative, or I think it is. We have certain experiences that communicate to us.
Because I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but part of the work I've done focuses on something called the reticular activating system, and it's a device that we have in our brain that its only responsibility is to keep us alive. That's it. Mm-hmm. One more breath. That's it. So when we're young, or when we're exposed to traumatic events like a car crash, or passing of a loved one, whatever we used to get us through that experience is typically what we will revert back to in the future when we have similar experiences, and these experiences are on an energy level. So when certain events come to, we are called triggered, or but that's why I was wondering, does this tie into this part in our life where we deem driving up to Big Bear as now it's scary. Now
totally.
It's fear-based. We're coming out of Running Springs. Here it goes. The heartbeat's going. We just go into these subconscious defaults.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was that default network we were talking about that I read about recently, that's when your mind goes back to when you're at rest and you start thinking about all these moments, like that's the fear of it happening again. This is going to happen over and over, and I have no way out of it. It's a hard thing to overcome.
It is, and it's all interrelated. So when we talk about these dimensions, and I spoke to it a little bit in the previous episode, they're all connected and interrelated, and they're all part of a system. So the brain does have certain functioning, and with thought patterns, but it's identifying patterns. So when it has a certain stimulus, it goes to, well, what did I do last time? Automatically, that's in the subconscious. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done if that reaction is at a low, say low vibration or a low energy, right? So if it's fear, let me read these, and this will kind of give us a framework. Sure. So in Power versus Force, it's the map of consciousness. And at the emotional level, the lowest form of emotion a human can experience is shame. So on a scale of 0 to 1,000, shame calibrates at about 20 points. Now, at the level 200 or more is when you start to support life. Below 200 is when it impacts or takes away from life experience or death. So shame at 20, guilt at 30. Now we're working our way up from guilt to apathy at 50. Welcome to being around middle schoolers and high schoolers, right? Grief at 75.
Yeah.
And I think some people would argue grief and shame being differently, and that would be I'd be fine to entertain that. That's just for the sake of this
absolutely.
book. Yeah, fear at 100, desire at 125. Chase your desires. Focus on your desires.
Wow. Yeah.
You're not living at a high level of consciousness at that level. Intentions might be a different way to phrase it, and then looking at core values to then what are my goals? What am I really going after versus my desires? Because desires could be just your appetite, right?
Wow.
Different
Okay.
appetites. Okay, so we're
Keep going.
there.
Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anger at 150, pride at 175, courage breaks the 200 mark. So when we get into a place of courage calibrates at level 200
Okay.
from an emotional perspective, and now we're at that place where we're at a higher level of functioning. And then from there, it goes to neutrality at 250, willingness, 310, up to acceptance, reason, love, joy, right? So we talked about joy, having that spiritual, like the emotion that you experience when you're at that level of being grounded in that inner peace is joy.
Right.
Peace is at level 600, and then enlightenment calibrates between 700 to 1,000. And those are your Jesus, your Buddhas,
Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, and I think it's I really wish we had females that came to mind. I know Mother Teresa was a big person on the planet that did a lot of work. I think we've just kind of been in more of a patriarchal historical context the last several thousand
I would
years.
respond to that in due time.
In due time,
Yep,
or
absolutely.
let me do some more work and investigative.
It's not that they're not there.
Totally. Not
totally.
that they're not there.
I find that so fascinating.
So those are the various levels.
I felt that hitting you on a personal level.
So
like,
I put it this way, and I'm vulnerable right now. So up until age 40, I feel like I didn't make an authentic decision for myself ever. So I went through the motions, going back to idolizing my older brother and doing what I felt like he would be doing, or he, to kind of get his approval, all the way through high school and into college, get through college, be the first one to graduate in my family and get a job. And, I feel like I was just checking all of these boxes to find fulfillment, to find joy, to find satisfaction, love, however you want to phrase it. And what I found is, even though I'm very appreciative of all of my experiences up until 40. It's absolutely what needed to happen in order for me to be here sitting today talking about this. But I carried a lot of shame. I carried a lot of guilt. I was the first one. We talk about monkey brain in the chatter constantly. I could put on a face like I was happy and I was fulfilled and satisfied. I was my biggest critic. And it's a real dark place to be. And when you said shame, it literally, because when you are carrying that much guilt and that much shame, and you think that poorly about yourself, you want to take away from life. I mean, it's a deep thing, and I was caught in a pattern of behaviors, and I'll just throw it out there. It's with alcoholism, and I was caught in a pattern of behaviors that I've had to admit that I didn't have to, but it came to me and I owned it, that I subconsciously, it would have been easier for me to drink a little too much and maybe get in an accident and just go away than to actually take a step back and own where I'm at and own the responsibilities that I have and start defining what I actually want authentically. It was tremendous work. It was by far the hardest thing that I've ever done and continue to do because our past experiences keep rearing their heads, and I feel like for the first time when I started going through this, for the first time I was a husband, I was a father, I was a good partner, business partner, brother, son. For the first time, I'm present. And I'm coming at life from an authentic place versus going through the motions. So
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Ruben. You know, being a part of, I guess that, you know, we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, you know, for viewers watching this, you know, we've all had a lot of life experiences.
Sure.
And the one that shows up a lot in the group that I deal with is suicide, you know, and that's been, you know, prevalent from people with, you know, what we would deem success or, you know, in those on the other four, right, in the observable realm. You know, and then you watch or, you know, you witness somebody deteriorate or, you know, pass away or take their life, whatever the case is, you know, how does that happen? You had it all. You were in the four, dude. Those are like, that's the world of effects, you know? So internally, where was that individual? And then for me, what the Power versus Force book has done, and to have that list, is now I can see individuals. And for me, I can read people really well. That's one of my gifts. And I could be like, ooh, there's a shame, guilt, you know? And so, and I, then I go to the level of, you know, they're probably vibrating at about, you know, 100 or so. And so rather than being a place of judgment, I can go, okay, here's where that person might be, you know, reading. How do I get them to a level of, you know, self-acceptance, love, and kind of take them up that chart a little bit. And that's where the work goes in, you know, and love is the only thing that you can do it. You know, you can't do it through a great saying and a great quote, and you just need to and pull up your bootstraps. And we do that so much in education with kids, and it just kills me to hear somebody say, you know, they just need to pull up their bootstraps.
Yeah.
Both books I'm reading, Power versus Force, and the other one by Adam Grant called Hidden Potential, you know, talks about you can only grow and reach potentials through empowerment. You know, a kid or somebody that's experienced a life of not even just trauma, but if you're working with someone that's in their 40s or 50s and they have a mental mind pattern of responding to certain external stimuli a certain way, that's years of reinforcing that response. You know, so my job's not to judge it. It's my responsibility, I feel, or, you know, my gift to recognize it and then approach it in love. And that's a challenge in itself, you know, for sure. But that's how we heal. You know, that's how we help people reach their potential as a human being, is through empowering. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. That's not the same path for everybody.
Well, it's a fine line because you mentioned earlier you don't want to necessarily go out there and well, we don't want to be preached to as far as told what to do. You know, in a very disciplined structure. Hey, I noticed you're down. You need to do this. You should do this. The last thing someone that's feeling down or in that place that you've identified them, the last thing they want is to be told what to do.
Well, I talked to this guy, the guy I connected with the other day. I'm like, I'm sitting with you. Let's say we were total strangers, but we just got on this crazy conversation about, do you think it would be good to engage some of your shortcomings and opportunities emotionally, maybe spiritually? And do you think that would be good for you? Like for a person to do, like healing, positive? Absolutely. Well, let's do it with you. Let's go ahead and have you talk about yours. Well, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
You get that response. Well, it's not for me, you know, but I could see it being beneficial to someone else, you know, like I could see the good in that, but I'm not going to air my laundry. I don't even know you. No. You know, it's like, it's dismissed all the time. It's so dismissed. Like, what did I say? Like, what if I walked into the bank and I'm third in line and there's three people behind me and I say, I'm emotionally unstable and I'm feeling shame and guilt. My vibrations are low and I need some help. You know, it's like,
people are gonna hit the button.
Yeah,
right?
they're hit panic button. You know, and there's a time and place to address these things.
Here's the tough part about this work, and this has been my experience, is that to get to a place where you are able to heal, you have to be in a dark place. I don't say dark place, but you have to be in a place where whether it's shame or guilt, you have to get yourself into this feeling body where you now are taking your own action, you're making your own choices which is an act of love, self-love, to get you out of it. And a lot of it is about awareness and just understanding that maybe you have a certain behavior. In my case was reverting to alcohol, but the alcohol wasn't the problem. It was just understanding that I was using alcohol to solve for something that's not even related to alcohol. So the healing component, it isn't just watching a podcast. It's not. There's you know the work component, and
there is work, and that it has to be intentional because it
Right.
is your journey, and you have to want to be a part of that. Dr. David Hawkins in Power versus Force talks about 4 things. So to reach like a high level of spiritual awareness, there's, he talks about number 1, there has to be a full desire to participate in learning and growing, tapping into source and doing the spiritual work. Meditation's kind of like the tool, the worldwide tool that people utilize to get there. There's plant medicines. I've been fortunate enough to participate in some of that to a degree, have a couple experiences, and they were so much work, and it was so physical. I have a tremendous appreciation for how that accelerates growth. What came up in those times,
Mm-hmm.
and then the physical. For me, they have been very physical, and it's work, and it's discipline. And how many of us have discipline? And you talk about meditating 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Josh, who I worked with 7 Dimensions with, my buddy Josh has his own app called Commit to Sit. And when he's worked with people, it's download the app, and each day you can set it to where it grows by 30 seconds. So day 1, or I'm committing to 40 days of learning to meditate. And so day 1's 30 seconds, day 2's 45, day 3's a minute. So you progress and kind of scaffold,
Yep.
into that experience. Seems like you guys have something to say in response to something.
No.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Because I've
Keep going.
So I've got a second thought into what you're saying. The other piece that came up, Ruben, was you talked about where you need to reach a dark place. And we add, so as human beings kind of being more binary in how we approach life, we see things good and bad, or we add a polarity component to it. Life is growing and unfolding. And I think when we look at, from the micro to the macro, there's this unfoldment, there's this expansion taking place. And at some day there might be, the opposite of that. I think so. Where we are now, as we identify in this state and time, is life wants to evolve. As a human being, the source wants you to experience yourself fully. Now, as a participant in this life experience, because that's going to occur whether I like it or not, I'm going to experience things as pain until I begin to develop that vision of going in internally and then looking and evaluating my life, looking at these 7 dimensions and going, okay, now when I'm in this quiet space and I'm able to focus, what's coming to me? How do I open up those channels to go, right, my financial needs some work. And I'm experiencing pain, or I'm experiencing discomfort, or I recognize that, hey, I'm in this place of stasis. It's time for me to grow. I feel being called. And then in that quiet time, all right, what am I feeling? Being, at the emotional level, being communicated through my emotions. And then, all right, developing a plan of action, brain, and then how am I going to accomplish that or pursue that?
So how, and an easy way to get to that, we call it a dark place, which I don't really like that, but it is what it is. So
no, that's fair.
Own what it is that you say you want to change, or that you own the behavior that you're embarrassed to admit that you wouldn't say in public. For me, it was like I'm a bad father, or I love with sarcasm, and there was a number of them, and this work went on for months, and it went on for a couple of years actually. But when you're able to own that without any blame or judgment against yourself, it takes pressure off of you. It talk about enlightenment. It literally feels like that is out in the open. Mm-hmm. You get from an energy standpoint, or it's been my experience to get to an energy standpoint where I've owned my past, or I've owned a behavior, and from there I sit with it, and I sit with it for as long as I can and breathe through it, and something will come to me, and I don't know. And we carry these emotions in the most random places in our body. So you might get heart palpitations, you might get flushed, you might your arms might start tingling, and it's just such an amazing experience to go through. And when you are grounded and in this phase, something does come to you that it says, I want this, and it may not necessarily make sense. then you come up with these intentions. Like, it's my intention to, breathe before I speak. It's like, well, that's impossible. But you know what I mean? It's a process.
It's a process, and it can be scary. It could also be very daunting if it seems like
Confusing.
it's isolated. If you feel like it's an isolated process, I really do.
Yeah.
I'm a fundamental believer that when the student is ready, the master appears. And the master might not always be an individual; it might be an experience, but you're going to get things to help propel you in certain directions, and it might take you time and a lot of being dinged in the head to go, oh, that took me a while to recognize.
I have a phrase for that. It's called "I heard it again for the first time," because this stuff is so. In a lot of ways, it's very simple. When you scale it back, you think, oh, yes, that seems easy. Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in the process and it's actually you, and this could be meditation, this could be reading, this could be continue to read through these things. And you mentioned you're reading this book for the second time. You're picking it up from a different mindset, and you're hearing things again for the first time,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it's part of the practice and the repetition. Like going to the gym, this isn't you read a self-help book and all of a sudden you're cured, or you're healed, I should say.
Yeah. So as we're coming up on time for this show,
Yeah,
and
we're
I
flying,
think hitting the spiritual and emotional is great. Those are two really good ones, and then I think we'll pick up the next time on moving into the mental aspect and how those, like, how mentally strong and clear do you have to be to also accept being emotionally stable or spiritually at peace. I think we might move into that, and I think what's interesting, and you brought it up twice, is like when you go to the gym to get physically fit, you might have a trainer, and you have a plan, and it's not overnight. This takes time to have that transformation happen, and they call it getting jacked or ripped. Like as we kind of wrap today, what advice might you have for someone watching that some of this is hitting home to get emotionally or spiritually ripped? I want to get jacked emotionally. So what might you today, as we kind of wrap up, what might you give them some piece of advice on that, or where to start?
Look in the mirror. I think the mirror is great because you see yourself, as yourself, and really figure out, is this something, do you want to dive into a deeper part of your life to have a more fulfilled life experience? And it has to come from a genuine place and a movement to do so. I caution, I think, for a lot of people, because we access information through books and podcasts and YouTube videos and whatnot, it becomes, you kind of get this like this mental stimulation, and it becomes a very mind-centered experience. And my cautionary tale, and this is a story to finish on, is when I started diving heavy into spirituality and meditation, I was going through an autoimmune disease, and there was a couple of nights when I was waiting for test results for cancer and AIDS, where that's a real moment to live through. And my marriage, my wife and I, we were high school sweethearts, and we've been married a while. And the spiritual work became very isolating. I isolated myself, and it was mostly in my head. And so having this situation now where I'm manifesting, disease, sickness, and illness, she was my life partner, but I wouldn't allow her. There was no vulnerability. I was caught up in my own head, and I knew all these things. And, I heard about that, or I've read that, or, I've seen that. I hit a place where we're having a conversation, and she said, I think I'm going to go live with so-and-so and take some, time, apart from one another. And I realized that moment who I was needed to die. And that moment sucked, dude. It was brutal. It was, crying, and you've both experienced a sense of loss, that, at different levels. But it was just this traumatic. I remember crying, being broken, and literally that part of myself died. After some time, and and she was there, I was finally vulnerable, and we worked through that in that moment over hours. It took a lot of time to get through it. after that, I remember having a certain level of attunement, and I feel like I peeled a lot of layers of the onion, and so like these experiences are real. This you don't gain and grow
So look within.
through.
I mean,
It's
it's
within.
standing right in front of you.
Yeah.
Well-
And things are gonna come out, and it could be messy and challenging.
I have a question for you. What's your thoughts on what's your thoughts on doing work like this by yourself or in the presence of people? And in the presence of people can be one other person, because I believe that a lot of our behaviors and our experiences happen in the presence of people, and I also feel like it was helpful for me to heal in the presence of people, to be in group settings. I mean, a lot of my work was done on a Zoom meeting. It was crazy, but different times with COVID and everything.
Yeah.
But it was still in the presence of people. I felt like when I owned something or I worked on something or I had an aha moment, I was healing in the presence of others, and they were reciprocating their energy. You know what I mean? It was
We're relational beings. I mean, we're an individuation sitting here, but that's kind of by design to help us to relate to a greater experience. So I think it's paramount that you have somebody, whether it's a paid professional, somebody that, and you'll know, that you feel aligned with.
Yep.
I've met with psychologists where it was a waste of an hour because we weren't at the same level.
Yep.
And, it just wasn't.
I guess I'm coming at it too from a perspective of someone who ends up going and buying a book or starts Googling some things, and it's
Totally.
like, maybe find a partner to do it with, or go out and seek a professional. Because I mean, that's certainly, we're wealth managers, right? But we've had very common experiences, and I think we're all part of the collective at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I appreciate you sharing some of your stories too. I know that a lot of this, I felt it. So I know this guy pretty well. We hang out a little bit. We spend some time. And, I've been fortunate enough over the years to get to know Ruben personally, beyond professionally. And I could feel, I don't even have to look at him. I'm all, oh, that's totally up Rube's alley. So I appreciate you sharing some of your personal stuff. And Jake, you just make me want to be a better man. Period. You had me at hello the first time I met you. So I always appreciate you being here. And I know our viewers, we get great feedback from the content. This is going to be a slam dunk home run for sure. So I look forward to diving back in and picking up where we left off next time.
Well, thank you guys. It's it's a blessing. It's a wonderful opportunity because it's it's not easy to get. There's cameras on. Even though I'm focused on you guys, people that I know and don't know are going to be seeing some of these things.
Yeah.
But this is kind of 2024 is exciting. And it's nice I feel like the end of the season, my leaves had fallen off. November, December was hole up, be with the family. And now kind of kicking off 2024, I feel a great energetic push in doing this work, around myself and, my core parts of my being. And to have this opportunity to communicate with you guys. Thank you.
Cool.
I've coined
Your
it the
gratitude.
year. I've coined it the year of Rube.
Yeah.
2024. It's my year.
And the year of boredom for me.
Right on.
Well, thanks again. It was fun. And to our viewers, if you're living your life and you have your health, you're the wealthiest person in the world. Thanks again for joining us in our digital barbershop. We'll see you next time.